In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on January 4th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Creighton versus Seton Hall. This matchup has that perfect Big East flavor, the kind where you can almost hear the building humming before tip. Creighton comes in feeling pretty good, riding a 4-game run where the offense has looked closer to an open gym run than a grind, knocking in close to 91 points a night on better than 52% shooting from the field. That is not just empty calories either, they have done it against real programs, so the confidence with the ball is very real. On the other side, Seton Hall has quietly gone from a team that spent last season stuck at something like 7-25 to a group sitting at 12-2, and that is not an accident. They built that jump on a defense that grades in the top 15 in the country by efficiency, and maybe the wildest part, they are sitting first nationally in block rate, turning roughly 1 out of every 5 opponent shots into a rejection. That kind of presence at the rim changes how guards think, how wings drive, how coaches draw up late-game sets. It just shrinks the floor. Now, when the books hang a short number with Seton Hall as a small home favorite, around that 3 and a hook range with Creighton getting plus money on the money line, they are basically asking you which personality you believe in more. Do you lean toward the loose, free-flowing offense that can get hot from everywhere, or the longer, more physical team that lives on contests, rebounds, and deflections? Here is the thing, Creighton lost that long-time anchor in the middle to the next level, and while the offense still sings, the front line does not have that same safety net behind every breakdown anymore. Seton Hall, by contrast, throws length at you in waves, controls the glass more often than not, and lets that shot blocking feed energy and easy runouts at home. You factor in that Prudential Center crowd that just watched them close a road game at Marquette with a 13-0 run, so everyone buying a ticket now believes this group can finish. And that matters when a spread hovers around 1 or 2 possessions. Against the number, Seton Hall has cashed more often, something like 9 covers in 14, while Creighton has been a little more uneven, closer to 6 covers in 14, and that pattern fits what you see on film, a team built to win in the margins versus a team that can run hot or cold. Creighton is also managing a cluster of front-court injuries, with a couple of rotation bigs listed as out for the season and a few more names tagged as questionable, while Seton Hall's main long-term backcourt loss is already fully absorbed into how they currently play. So if you picture this turning late into a half-court brawl with whistles, offensive boards, and trips to the line, it is hard not to lean toward the home side that is more comfortable living in that mud, even if the number looks a little scary at first glance. As our first pick for this matchup, the Seton Hall Pirates to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. On the surface, the resume leans toward a slower, tighter script. Seton Hall gives up only about 63 points a night, and their whole identity is built on making every catch, every cut, and every drive feel crowded. Creighton, despite the talent on offense, has seen more games land under the number than over this season, so if you just looked at a trends page, you would probably shrug and think lower scoring. But that is where the story gets a little more layered. The recent version of Creighton is not the same as the early season box scores. They have been playing like a different animal over the last 4, dropping just under 91 points a game, shooting above 52%, and doing it against teams like Xavier, Marquette, Utah Tech, and Butler. When a group finds that kind of rhythm, it tends to carry over, especially with all the spacing and shooting they bring. Seton Hall, for their part, is no longer that defense or bust outfit either. You saw that in the 79-73 win at Marquette, where they showed a higher offensive ceiling and, maybe more important, a willingness to keep pushing late instead of just sitting on a lead. Their rim protection also has a funny side effect. It does not just kill opponent possessions, it also sparks transition chances the other way, and that can quietly pump a total up without anyone really noticing in real time. Here is where the late game script sneaks into the picture. Both teams can get to the free throw line, both shoot in the mid-70s from the stripe, which means those trips are worth something. If this thing stays within a couple of possessions deep into the second half, and that is hardly a stretch given how closely they line up in efficiency numbers, you can easily imagine a classic Big East finish, a few quick fouls, some extended possessions, maybe a scramble 3 or 2. Those last 2 minutes can sometimes tack on 10 to 15 points by themselves, and totals in this mid-range are very sensitive to that kind of chaos. So while the season-long summary leans a little more conservative, the recent form, the way both teams can generate easy points from blocks leading to runouts and from frequent trips to the line, all points toward a game that plays a touch faster and scores a bit more than the raw averages suggest. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Marquette versus UConn. Sunday in stores has that classic big number feel to it. You take one look at the spread for Marquette visiting Connecticut, and most people have the same reaction. Seriously, can they really win by that much? Connecticut comes in as a heavy home favorite, sitting at 13-1 overall and 3-0 in the Big East, sitting fourth in the country and riding a 9-game win streak into Harry Gamble Pavilion. Marquette walks in at 5-9, 0-3 in league play, and the records alone tell you which locker room feels a little lighter right now. The market has responded with a spread right around Connecticut by 20 to 20.5 points, depending on where you look, so this is not your standard tight conference line. Honestly, this kind of number makes a lot of bettors nervous before they even think about matchups. Let me explain why it still deserves a serious look. Connecticut is not just winning, they are stacking comfortable margins over and over again. They score about 79.3 points per game and allow only 61.5, which means they are beating teams by almost 18 points on average without needing anything wild or fluky. The game log reads like a highlight reel for people who like blowouts. They have wins by 24, 27, 23, and another 23-point win on the road at Xavier to close out December, and that is not the behavior of a team that pulls guys early and lets opponents sneak through the back door for fun. At home in Gampel, with that ranking next to their name and a long streak on the line, they tend to play like a group that understands they are the standard everyone else in the league is chasing. Here is the thing that really matters for a big spread. It is not only that Connecticut scores, it is how they make games feel for their opponents. They hold teams to 37.5% shooting from the field and 26% from beyond the arc, and they own the glass by more than 6 rebounds per night. That combination shortens possessions, turns bad shots into quick one-and-done trips, and makes it easier for a favorite to create separation in the second half. When a team can contest shots, finish possessions with rebounds, and still run efficient half-court offense on the other end, you do not need a frantic pace to build a big margin. You just need 40 minutes of being the grown-up in the room. On the other side, Marquette is in a very different place. They score 76.6 points per game, give up 77.4, and sit with a tiny negative scoring margin that tells you they are basically living on the wrong side of coin flips and small lapses. They are being out-rebounded by more than 2 boards per game, which is not a disaster on its own, but it becomes a real problem when you walk into a building where the home team already has a built-in edge on the glass. They head into this matchup on a 5-game losing streak, so confidence is not exactly overflowing, and the grind of starting Big East play with 3 losses has a way of wearing on shot selection, patience, and trust. It is not that Marquette is hopeless, it is that they are trying to figure themselves out while facing one of the most disciplined and physical defenses they have seen, on the road, as a big underdog. Big spreads in conference play are almost a psychological experiment. There is always that voice in the back of your head saying, "Come on, 20-plus points in a league game, that has to be too much." But when you line up what Connecticut has already done through 14 games, and you compare it to how Marquette has struggled to keep opponents off the line, off the glass, and out of rhythm, the profile that fits a comfortable, sustained margin is not hard to see. You get an elite scoring differential, a defense that squeezes life out of possessions, and a home crowd that usually keeps the energy high long after a normal game would have gone sleepy. All of that pulls the argument toward one side when we are talking about who is more likely to actually cover such a big number in a full 40-minute game. As our first pick for this matchup, the Connecticut Huskies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The total sitting in the mid-40s looks innocent at first glance. You see two capable offenses, a modern college game with plenty of threes, and your brain goes, sure, that sounds like a points game. But the way these two teams have played this season makes that number a lot more interesting than it appears. Connecticut games have quietly averaged right around 141 total points. They put up those 79.3 points per night and give up only 61.5, which is friendly if you like efficient offense, but a little less friendly if you are holding an over ticket that needs both teams to do real damage. 9 of their 14 contests have finished with 145 points or fewer, so most of their schedule has landed at or below where this total is hanging. That is not a random quirk, it is a reflection of how they prefer games to unfold. Strong shot contests, limited clean looks from deep, and one-shot possessions built on that rebounding edge naturally squeeze the number of clean scoring opportunities across 40 minutes. Marquette brings a very different statistical shape, but it still does not automatically scream track meet. They are scoring 76.6 and allowing 77.4, which suggests they live in the mid to high 70s much of the time, but that is with a defense that has not exactly found a reliable gear. Their opponents are shooting almost 44.7% from the field and hitting better from deep than Marquette manages themselves. When you mix that with their slight rebounding deficit, you end up with games where there are enough open shots to keep the scoreboard moving, but also enough empty trips when the ball sticks or the offense drifts. In other words, they create noise, but not always clean, up and down chaos. Here is where the style matchup with Connecticut's defense starts to matter for the total. You have a team in Connecticut that limits good looks, keeps opponents off the offensive glass, and is perfectly comfortable playing long, patient half-court possessions. Across from them you have a Marquette group that scores, but does its best work when it can get into some rhythm and avoid grinding late in the shot clock against length and physicality. When those two worlds collide, the scoring environment often tilts toward fewer efficient shots, more possessions that stretch the clock, and a box score that looks busy without exploding. The combined averages, the shooting profiles, and the way Connecticut in particular has dragged totals slightly under the market more often than not all lean toward a game that lands below the mid-140s more often than it clears it comfortably. So while a number in the 144 to 145 and a half range is not outrageous for two capable offenses, the actual season data for pace, efficiency, and defensive disruption nudges the expectation toward a quieter final total. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Bradley versus Murray State. You have a really fun one here, the kind of game that feels like a proper Sunday evening show in a loud college gym rather than just another number on the board. We have Bradley heading into the CFSB Center in Murray, Kentucky, in a Missouri Valley clash, with the visitors sitting at 10-5 to 0 overall and 3-1 to 0 in league play, and the Racers at 12-3 to 0 and 4-0 to 0 in the conference. Books are treating Murray State as the clear home favorite with a spread in that 5.5 range, which already tells you the market respects both the Racers' current form and their building. Official sites and major data providers line up on the basics here, from records to style to who is actually on the floor. Jaquan Johnson for Bradley and Javon Jackson for Murray State are active, leading scorers, and very much part of the current rotation, and there are no widely reported injuries that would shake up either core group as of now. Everything about how we talk pace, scoring, and tendencies comes straight from this season, not from some hazy memory of what these programs were a few years ago. Now, when we talk about which side is more likely to cover that number, the first thing that jumps out is how Murray State is carrying itself right now. This is a team that knows it is rolling, and you can feel it in the way they show up for home games. 8 straight wins overall, a long stretch of home success, and a spotless conference start give you a group that walks into warm-ups already believing they should control the evening. You can almost picture the student section being a little louder than usual, because a league game with a name like Bradley coming in on a Sunday is the kind of thing people circle on their calendars around campus. On the floor, Murray State behaves like a team that trusts its offense to lift everything else. They score in the high 80s per game, shoot in the high 40s from the field, share the ball, and rebound well enough that a missed shot is not the end of the story, just the start of a second chance. That kind of offensive profile matters for a favorite because it is much easier to turn a 3-point lead into a 10-point lead when you know you can score in waves rather than grind for every single basket. Even when they wobble for a few possessions, the Racers tend to answer with a little run of their own, and that is almost exactly what you want when you are laying points. Bradley, on the other side, has a personality that travels, and that is what makes them appealing to a lot of underdog bettors. They lean into a disruptive, handsy defense, forcing around the mid-teens in turnovers each night and piling up steals near the top of the league. Their defense allows a little over 70 points per game, which sounds modest until you remember how many live ball turnovers they create and how much chaos that brings. They are built to be irritating for favorites, especially favorites that get casual with the ball. Here is the thing though, that very strength can cut both ways in a road spot like this. Aggressive pressure defense tends to mean more fouls, more whistles, and more time spent dealing with foul trouble, especially when the opponent is a confident home team that already gets a friendly whistle on drives. Murray State is comfortable living at the free throw line and converting in the mid-70s, and that becomes a slow, steady lever that pushes a margin wider as the game wears on. If Bradley's key guards and wings pick up early fouls while trying to jump passing lanes or body drivers, their defensive edge dulls quickly, and you are left with a tired group trying to trade baskets with one of the better offenses in the country by the numbers. There is also a mental layer that hangs over this matchup. Historically, Bradley has had the better of the head-to-head series and has strung together several wins in a row, which naturally gives the Braves some confidence. At the same time, for this particular Murray State group and staff, it sets up as a little enough is enough game, the sort coaches quietly highlight as a chance to reset the story between the programs. New season, home crowd, hot start, and a chance to knock off the team that has had your number for a bit. That is easy material for a pre-game speech. If you roll all of that together, the spread around that mid-single-digit zone starts to feel less like a trap and more like a reflection of how these styles collide in this building. You have a favorite that plays with pace, can score in bunches, and tends to surge when the crowd gets going, facing a dog whose strength might actually feed into foul trouble and fatigue rather than a controlled slowdown. It is not that Bradley is outclassed, they are not. It is that the setting and the rhythm of the game lean toward the type of script where the home side is more likely to stretch things out late rather than get dragged into a coin flip finish. As our first pick for this matchup, the Murray State Racers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Odds makers are looking at two teams that, on the season, combine for scoring averages that land comfortably in the mid-160s when you add them together. Murray State lives up around 88 points per game, while Bradley sits in the high 70s, and neither side is exactly obsessed with turning games into half-court rock fights. So the number in that 159.5 zone is really the market asking, do you believe what the season has told you so far, or are you expecting everyone to suddenly tighten up? Let me explain why the recent game logs make that question even louder. Murray State's last stretch of games has included totals in the ballpark of 149, 164, 153, a wild one in the 200s, and another in the mid-160s. Those are not gentle, methodical contests. Those are track meets where both sides are living in the 80s or higher, more often than not. Bradley, despite the defensive identity, has also been living in fairly high-scoring environments, like the mid-40s against Evansville and the mid-160s in that loss at Belmont. When both teams are comfortable in scores like that, you have to take it seriously, even if your instinct is to expect Valley basketball to be slower and more defensive. Stylistically, these two push each other toward more possessions rather than fewer. Bradley's pressure defense, the very thing that keeps them in games, is also a cheat code for pace, because every steal is either a layup the other way or a broken floor possession where the shot goes up early in the clock. Murray State is more than happy to play in that kind of scramble, and they have the offensive talent to punish even small lapses when the ball is flying around. You get a lot of quick triggers, a lot of early threes, and very little of the walk it up, run 30 seconds of sets, and accept a grind mentality that would naturally drag a total down. Another piece that matters, and it can be easy to overlook, is how physical both teams are and how that tends to show up at the foul line. Both rank near the top of the league in free throw attempts, which means you are likely staring at a game with a whistle-heavy stretch or two where the clock is stopped and points keep stacking up from the stripe. Murray State is strong at the line, Bradley is solid, and that combination in a reasonably tight spread game usually means a long, drawn-out final few minutes with free throws instead of empty trips. If you have ever sat on an under ticket watching a parade of late fouls, you know exactly how fast a comfortable number can vanish when every possession becomes two shots with nobody contesting. Now, to be fair, there is always a path for a number like this to stay under, and it is worth saying that out loud. If Bradley's defense turns this into a sloppy turnover festival where both sides miss open looks and spend more time complaining than scoring, the game can start to feel heavy, and heavy games usually drag totals down. Or if the officials decide early that they are going to let a lot of contact go, which sometimes happens in physical conference games, that kills a lot of those easy, clock-stopped points that overs quietly rely on. So there is a scenario in which the final score lands somewhere in the low 150s, and you feel like the number was just a touch too ambitious. Even with those caveats, though, the season story so far is pretty blunt. These teams are used to playing in games that land above typical college totals, and this specific matchup involves a high-powered home offense, a disruptive road defense that speeds things up, and two groups that get to the line often and can convert. If you trust what the data and the recent box scores are shouting, rather than what your nerves might whisper when you see a big number, you end up leaning toward a game that looks more like a Sunday night shootout than a defensive clinic. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Washington versus Indiana. Assembly Hall on a Sunday night is not exactly a soft landing spot for a new Big Ten visitor. You have Washington coming in with that 9-4 mark, still figuring out life in a new league, walking into a building that treats noise like a contact sport. Indiana, sitting at 10-3, has used that place like a pressure cooker, turning visiting guards into decision-making experiments and letting their own shooters feed off the crowd every time a three splashes. Stylistically, these two look like they want similar things, but one of them is trying to do it while taped together. Washington's season to this point has been a balancing act, with key rotation pieces in and out, and that really shows when you look at how often they need their main ball handlers to solve problems by themselves. The roster still has talent and some real shot making, but the margin for error shrinks fast when you start crossing names off the board, especially on a long trip into a hostile gym where you cannot fake composure. On the other side, Indiana's whole personality right now is built around depth, pace, and that feeling that there is always one more shooter waiting in the corner if the initial action dies. The offense has that modern, spread-you-out feel where you defend one good possession, the ball swings twice, and there is another clean look anyway. When that is paired with a defense that already sits in that you really have to earn everything category, you get the kind of profile that tends to punish short-handed underdogs who rely on one or two guys to keep them afloat. The travel piece is not everything, but it is not nothing either. Flying a banged-up roster across a couple of time zones to face a locked-in, confident home favorite that is already comfortable winning by margin is the kind of setup bettors quietly love. You can picture the script pretty easily. Washington lands a few early punches, Indiana absorbs them, starts stacking stops, and those small scoring runs the Hoosiers put together feel bigger than they are because of the atmosphere and the fatigue factor. That is usually when a competitive game around the number starts tilting toward a result that clears the spread rather than flirts with it. The risk, of course, is always the classic backdoor. Indiana leads, relaxes for 2 minutes, Washington strings together a couple of threes or late free throws, and anyone holding a ticket suddenly starts rethinking their life choices. But if you compare the current health, the bench reliability, and how these two want to play for a full 40 minutes rather than 10-minute bursts, it is hard not to lean toward the deeper team that is already comfortable winning by multiple scores in this exact building. As our first pick for this matchup, the Indiana Hoosiers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. At first glance, you see an Indiana team that loves to shoot threes and can reach the 80s without breaking much of a sweat, paired with a Washington group that has had stretches where the offense looks free and fun, and you think points, points, points. But once you factor in who is actually available and how both coaches have been winning games lately, the picture tilts a little. Washington's injuries do more than just trim the rotation, they change the way possessions look. With a key scorer sidelined and other front court pieces limited or missing, the Huskies have leaned more into deliberate, matchup hunting offense rather than a constant track meet. You get more half-court chess and fewer wild end-to-end exchanges. That is often great for staying competitive, but it quietly shaves a few possessions off the game, which matters a lot when totals are set in that mid-range where pace swings everything. Indiana, for all the fireworks from deep, is still attached to a pretty serious defensive identity. They can stretch the floor and bury you with threes, but they also make you work deep into the clock, chase through actions, and finish tough shots at the rim. At home, that intensity usually ramps up because nothing gets that building louder than a chase down block or a forced shot clock violation. When the favorite plays real defense and the underdog is dealing with continuity issues, you often get long stretches of grindy basketball that do not quite match the reputation of the offenses involved. There is also the game flow angle that people sometimes underrate. If Indiana plays from in front for long chunks, they are not in a rush to trade quick threes for quick threes. They can use clock, lean into their sets, and trust that the defense will do enough that they do not need to win this game 100-90. Washington, meanwhile, has to pick its spots. They cannot afford a wild, 40-minute shootout against a deeper roster, so even when they are chasing, there is an incentive to be selective rather than reckless. All of that pushes this matchup toward a scoring environment that feels competitive and tense, but a touch lower than what people might imagine when they first see these two logos together. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Loyola Marymount versus Gonzaga. Let's set the scene for this one in Spokane, because this is not your usual little conference game. You have Loyola Marymount walking into the kennel with a 10-6 record, 1-2 in league play, facing a Gonzaga team that is sitting at 15-1 overall and 3-0 in the West Coast Conference, riding an 8-game winning streak with the crowd already in full voice before warm-ups even finish. On the surface, it looks like your classic "why is this even on the board" mismatch, and the books are telling you as much by stacking a spread in the low to mid-20s, the basketball version of spotting someone almost 4 touchdowns. Now, Gonzaga absolutely earns that respect. They are putting up a little more than 92 points per night on about 52% shooting from the floor and around 37% from deep, and they are beating teams on average by more than 23 points. They have bodies everywhere. They can stay big. They can go small. They share the ball. And when that crowd gets rolling, the whole thing can feel like a snowball coming downhill that never stops. It is really easy to watch that and think the only question is how many points you are willing to lay. But here is the thing. When you start looking at what actually happens against the number, the story softens. In their last 5, Gonzaga has won every game, but they have covered only once, going 1-4 against the spread even while the win column keeps stacking. You saw them wobble at San Diego, up 21 and somehow sweating out a 99-93 finish. You saw them back at home needing overtime to escape Seattle, down 13 in the second half before the comeback, and an 80-72 final that never sniffed a cover against that massive number. Some of that is human nature. When you are laying 20+ every night, there is a lot of room for late coasting, odd rotations, and a couple of empty garbage time possessions that swing tickets. On the other side, Loyola Marymount is not walking in as some broken bottom feeder just hoping to keep the score respectable. They are 10-6, 1-2 in the league, and they have been throwing punches. They just went to Pullman and lost 78-76 at Washington State, a game that came down to the final trips. They were right there with St. Mary's in a one-possession type battle. They have taken care of business against teams they should beat like Pacific, Morgan State, and North Alabama, and that is not nothing because good underdogs are usually competent favorites first. Stylistically, LMU looks like a team that can at least negotiate with Gonzaga rather than just absorb a beating. They score around 78.5 points per game on roughly 48% shooting, which is efficient enough that empty trips are not a way of life. Defensively, they are holding teams under 68, and more importantly, they are not soft on the glass. They have real size, real length, and a rotation that does not rely on one guy doing everything. You have multiple wings and forwards who can handle, pass, and create, which means when Gonzaga starts throwing different looks at them, LMU has answers that are more complicated than pray for a bailout 3. If you watched that Washington State game, you saw what this group looks like when it settles in. Jan Vite just went for 28 on the road, attacking off the dribble, getting to his spots, and looking like the guy people expected before those old out indefinitely footnotes stuck around a bit too long on some sites. Around him, you have steady scoring from Myron Amy Jr., Jalen Shelley, Rokas Josias, and Rodney Brown Jr., and the key is that any one of them can be the secondary punch on a given night. That balance matters when you are running into a defensive scheme that will happily take away your first option. And honestly, the mental side of this spot leans toward the underdog too. Gonzaga just survived an emotional overtime game against Seattle, where they had to expend a lot of energy digging out of that hole, and now they are asked to come right back and win big again against a team that is more physical and more organized than a typical cupcake. LMU, on the other hand, has just had the experience of nearly stealing one at Washington State and knows it belongs on the floor with a ranked team. When you combine that with the fact that LMU has been very friendly to backers this season and Gonzaga has been a little loose in cover land lately, that giant number starts to feel like an invitation rather than a warning. So while nobody is pretending Gonzaga is not the superior team, there is a very real gap between how good Gonzaga is straight up and how far odds makers are asking them to stretch this margin. As our first pick for this matchup, the Loyola Marymount Lions to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Books have parked the total number in the mid-150s, which is their way of saying, we expect a lot of points, but we also think one side might not quite keep up. Whenever you see a total in that range, you are really being asked a simple question. Is this going to be a full-on track meet, or is someone going to throw sand in the gears? If you have been watching Gonzaga lately, you know why that total is sitting where it is. They just hung 98 on Campbell. They put 91 on Oregon on a neutral floor. They opened league play by dropping 96 at Pepperdine. They scored 99 in that wild one at San Diego. Even in the ugly overtime game against Seattle, where the offense never really felt in rhythm, they still finished at 80. This is not a team that accidentally stumbles into 68-64 rock fights very often. What makes it interesting is that Loyola Marymount is not exactly afraid of the scoreboard either. They are averaging about 78.5, but the ceiling nights are where you see their true personality. 91 against North Alabama, 83 on Morgan State, 80 on Pacific, 78 on the road at Washington State in a game that could easily have pushed into the 80s if a few more late shots had dropped or if that one had needed extra time. LMU is not a run-at-all-costs group, but they are very comfortable in games where both teams are actually scoring. The stylistic clash sounds like it should slow things down, but in practice it often does the opposite. Gonzaga likes to run, attack early, and play with a lot of freedom, and at home they rarely slam on the brakes. LMU, when it is allowed to get into its sets, runs smart half-court actions, uses spacing, and takes good shots, which means they can punish Gonzaga for those occasional defensive lapses. If Gonzaga jumps ahead by 15 or 20, LMU cannot walk the ball up and hope the clock saves them. They will have to take more threes, shoot earlier in the clock, and that usually adds possessions, not removes them. Here is where the math and the feel actually agree. Gonzaga is living in the low 90s on average, and LMU is sitting in the high 70s, which puts their combined scoring profile somewhere in that 160 to 170 neighborhood before you even adjust for game script. Yet the total is a full 15 or so points lower than that scoring blend suggests. To cash an under ticket, you are basically asking one of these offenses to come in noticeably below what it usually does, or for the game to turn into such a slog that both teams are dragged out of character. Given the way Gonzaga has been pushing tempo and the way LMU has been answering on the offensive end against quality opponents, that is a hard story to buy. And we have not even talked about the late-game chaos factor yet. If this plays out the way the spread hints, and Gonzaga is up somewhere in the high teens or low 20s in the second half, you could easily see LMU extending the game with longer possessions on offense paired with some fouling on defense. Gonzaga is too talented to just dribble the ball out for 10 straight minutes. They are going to keep attacking, and extra free throws with tired legs under the rim is usually an ally for anyone holding an over. Picture something like Gonzaga landing in the upper 80s or low 90s and LMU finding its way into the high 60s or low 70s, and you can see pretty quickly why that mid-150s number does not feel all that safe on the low side. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.